September 8th, 1992. On a wet night in Edmonton, Alberta, police mark off an isolated trucking yard. Behind the tape line, a sight that rattles the most experienced veterans. The dead body of an innocent 6-year-old girl.
It was drizzling rain and cold, and it just seemed that the night had been sent for the murder. Her death really hung in the air over that entire scene.
Before long, anger and fear run rampant as police search for a killer who preys on children.
People started to become paranoid. There was a murderer amongst us, and we didn't know who he was. It made people very fearful.
Along with police, there are those who chronicle the investigation up close, on film, on paper, and on tape. They are the public's first witness. Through their lens, they capture our darkest chapters of crime. Every day, millions of innocent children play safely in parks and yards across North America. But on rare occasions, a child suddenly goes missing. A parent's worst nightmare becomes a reality. In the 1990s, in Edmonton, Alberta, a shocking act of abduction and murder held an entire city hostage.
Because Edmonton is a small, close-knit community on a certain level where people feel safe with their children, to a certain extent, people wouldn't even lock their doors in Edmonton. This was the first major horrific event that set the city on edge, and it changed the way that people live their lives in Edmonton.
September 1992. Ray Gustafson and Karen Villette live in a townhouse in the city's East End. They have 3 children, Roseanne, Barry, and 6-year-old Corrine, affectionately nicknamed Punky for her often unruly hair.
She always had a rooster tail. A piece of hair just going up like a rooster. Seen the punk rock singers on the TV, and they had their hair spiked up all the time. And we kept bugging her that she was a little punky for that.
Her real name was Corrine Crystal. She was named after my grandma. When my grandma phoned the house, she'll say, "This Corrine, no, my name is Punky."
She was a miracle.
September 6th, 9 a.m. Karen and eldest daughter Roseanne head out briefly while Ray stays behind with the other 2 children. Punky asks permission to go outside with her friend Lindsay from next door.
They were just playing in the front yard. It was a Sunday morning, all kinds of people around, so you'd think this is a very safe situation.
I was sitting at the kitchen window, and I forgot my cigarettes over in the living room. I went to get them, and all of a sudden she was missing.
Next door, Punky's friend rushes to her mother.
Lindsay immediately ran into the house and told her mother, "A murderer took Punky. The Boogeyman took Punky." The mother didn't at first. "What do you mean, a murderer?" That's all the little girl would repeat. "A murderer took Punky. The Boogeyman took Punky."
The story quickly reaches Punky's father, Ray.
And, Ray's outside in his stocking feet, doing 360s around the townhouse complex looking for Corrine.
Just ran out to see if I could see anything.
Punky!
And I couldn't ever see her. And I couldn't concentrate on anything else.
Punky!
But for trying to find Corrine, my daughter.
The police get down there in a matter of minutes, and they're trying to ascertain if they just have a missing child, or if they have an abduction, or whether they just have a child playing hide and seek, and maybe it's just as innocent as that.
With each passing moment, fears of foul play grow. Punky's mother learns her daughter is missing and rushes home.
I ran in and I just seen the police officers. That's when the investigation started. When the search and stuff like that started.
More than a dozen officers are soon looking for 6-year-old Punky Gustafson.
Everybody was out looking for her. Of course, you start with the inner perimeter and start to work out from Corrine's house. And we'd move on to the next area, so we began to expand our search.
At the same time, police hope to get more information from Punky's 5-year-old friend, Lindsay. In her own words, Punky was taken away by someone she called the murderer and a boogeyman.
We wonder, where would Lindsay get that kind of terminology from, such a young age? Lindsay probably just used murderer as a term for a bad person who took her friend away. It was quite obvious that Lindsay had seen something that really upset her. They enlisted the aid of a policewoman to interview Lindsay.
Trying to distinguish between fact and what might simply be the product of a 5-year-old girl's imagination, police gradually piece together the features of a suspect. Punky's abductor is believed to be between 5'5" and 6 feet tall, with dark skin and a slim build. He has earrings, and his hair might be discolored, as if bleached.
She had described a white patch in his hair. And this white patch was somewhere in the middle of his head.
An area boy named Joseph comes forward with another possible lead.
Joseph had been away from home for part of the day when policemen are doing the door-to-door inquiries, and he had come home and, was talking to his parents about all the commotion, and he'd said, well, I saw a man carrying a little blonde-haired girl to a blue van this morning. And he had seen this man carrying this girl and had been carrying her in a bear hug.
By the following morning, more than 30 officers are on the case, assisted by over 100 volunteers. Police release a description of their potential suspect and his blue van to the public. News of the missing girl rattles the peaceful city. People hope for the best, but fear for the worst.
Almost from the moment that she went missing, everyone was paying attention because it was just a sense that this was not right.
Oh, everybody's here waiting for you.
Through the media, Punky's mother pleads for her daughter's safe return.
I guess I was just out of it. I was blaming it myself that I wasn't home. As I kept on saying, if I was home, maybe it wouldn't happen to her.
In the rare moments she manages to get some sleep, she cradles a framed photograph of her missing daughter in her arms.
Part of me died when we couldn't find her. Didn't know what to do.
September 8th. 2 days have passed since Corrine Gustafson was last seen. In the yard of a trucking company near the edge of the city, a man performs a safety check on one of the rigs. Out of the corner of his eye, he spots what at first glance looks like a doll in a purple coat on the ground between two trailers. Getting closer, he realizes it is the dead body of a young girl. Within minutes, police are on the scene.
Corrine was laying face down between two of the trailers that were parked in the trucking yard. You couldn't see too much other than the top of her head. You could see that she was wearing her mother's coat that she had borrowed that morning. Her socks were muddy.
News of the tragic discovery reaches Punky's parents.
I thought that when I heard the knock, I thought they would say that they found her alive.
All of a sudden, they come and told us that she was found in a trucking yard, that she was murdered. I had to go identify the body at the trucking yard. That's the hardest part I ever had to go through, go to see her. Blanket covered her. And then it just pulled it down so I could see her face. I said, yes, sir.
As darkness arrives and rain begins to fall, police prepare to search for clues in one of Edmonton's most shocking murders to date.
It was a horrible moment for people in this city to have something like that happen. Everyone's debating, who would do something like this? Why would someone do something like this?
September 8th, 1992. On a rainy night in Edmonton, Alberta, 6-year-old Corinne Gustafson, nicknamed Punky, has been found dead in a trucking yard. Police cordon off the area and detectives arrive. Police capture the scene on film before Punky's body is removed for autopsy. They suspect murder, possibly carried out by a dark-skinned suspect driving a blue van. Forensic expert Joe Pendleton is among those battling the elements in the search for clues.
By the time I got there, it was quite late, and the body had already been removed from the scene, but you could feel it. Her death really hung in the air over that entire scene. It just seemed that the night had been sent for the murder. I don't think you could read anything more sort of appropriate in any true crime magazine. It really felt like that.
Working by flashlight, investigators noticed tire tracks near where the body was found. Also catching their interest, a collection of mysterious markings.
It was clear to us that they were associated with the body because they seemed to start very, very close to the body and work their way back towards where the tire tracks originated. So we associated them very much to the culprit. And you could see them, you could photograph them. We weren't sure what they were.
Studying the tire tracks and identifying the markings may eventually provide police with crucial leads. Meanwhile, at the morgue, medical examiners brace themselves for an autopsy on the young victim.
All we knew was that she'd been abducted. She was now dead. Clearly, this was a criminal death, but there were absolutely no clues to who might have done this. One of those really, really sad cases where she should be alive, she should be playing, but there she is on our autopsy table.
More grim details about the crime soon surface as medical examiners remove and photograph Punky's clothing.
It was then that we learned that her coat was not put on properly as you would put on a coat.
Her arms weren't in the sleeves, they were kind of within the jacket, and the whole jacket was twisted so the zipper went down the right side of her body. Her pants were on backwards, so she had been undressed and some attempt made to redress her.
Further examination reveals that 6-year-old Punky Gustafson has been violently raped. The cause of death is believed to be smothering. Lab tests for semen left by the suspect turn up nothing, but a single black pubic hair is found. Unfortunately, due to a lack of genetic material in the root of the hair, this direct link to the suspect yields no DNA evidence. Meanwhile, details of the horrible crime shock a grief-stricken family in an outraged city.
It was crushing for everyone in this city. Here's this incredible, lively, vibrant little girl who had the rest of her life ahead of her, and it was cruelly taken away from her in a way that was so shocking and so horrific who could do such a thing? I mean, this girl weighed 39 pounds. She was extremely tiny, extremely small. She was just a little child.
All I want to do is sit down and cry. Just couldn't see my life going on without her.
At police headquarters, tips flow in from an angry public, now on guard for a child killer in their midst.
With a crime such as this, the public response was huge. And so the outpouring of assistance was overwhelming.
A lot of people were calling in when they would see a blue van out there, and they would give us a license plate number, and we ran some offline searches through motor vehicle branch and had every blue van identified, or as many blue vans as possible.
While some officers track down vehicles and their owners, others focus directly on individuals that are familiar with the victim. One young man in the same neighborhood comes under scrutiny. Nicknamed Skunk, he has a white patch in the middle of his hair, like the description of the suspect that was released by police.
He was a guy that dressed all in black and wore studs. He matched the description, or what people thought matched the description. There was about 22 or so tips just on Skunk.
Although police rule Skunk out as a suspect following an interview, neighborhood suspicions persist. Another possible breakthrough involves a mentally handicapped teenager from the neighborhood. Although the boy doesn't match the description, he seems to have knowledge of the abduction.
He was giving a lot of information that perhaps somebody who wasn't involved should not know. So he became a real interesting suspect. This boy eventually confessed, but he couldn't provide the level of detail, and actually a lot of the detail that he provided was erroneous. We knew that he wasn't the person.
Yet another person of interest early on is Punky's own uncle, a man named Ron Davies.
Ron, very early, was a person of interest in a number of investigators' eyes. Some investigators didn't like the way he reacted when the news broke that Maureen's body had been found. Ron was a trucker. Maureen was found in a trucking yard, things like that.
Despite police suspicions, Punky's family refuses to believe that Ron Davies could be involved. In the days that follow, the list of potential suspects grows at a staggering pace. Before the end of the week, police are sifting through more than 500 tips. Fears of another attack are rampant.
People became paranoid. This killer was still out there. They started to fear that this kind of extreme and outrageous crime could happen again.
At the same time, in the area where Punky's body was found, the rain-soaked ground has dried, allowing police to make plaster casts of the tire tracks and the mysterious markings. In what many feel is a race against time, it is here that a fresh lead is about to surface. September 1992. In Edmonton, Alberta, police investigate the rape and murder of 6-year-old Corrine Gustafson, known to many by her nickname Punky. 6 days after the discovery of her body, a funeral for the young victim draws an outpouring of grief and anger from the shaken community.
We got her dress to be buried in, and then we gave her a teddy bear. That was her favorite, because she couldn't sleep without a teddy bear beside her.
While a city grieves, police search for Punky's killer, possibly a dark-skinned man with a blue van. But despite help from the public, none of the tips pouring into headquarters lead to an arrest. It is then that a breakthrough at the trucking yard where Punky was found helps to fill in the portrait of a killer. The mysterious markings left on the ground catch the attention of a seasoned RCMP forensic expert named Barry Riggy.
He looked at them very, very thoughtfully, and he knew right away what they were. He said, well, he says, Joe, he says, I've seen this before. And he says, I think this is the toe of the shoe. And I'm thinking, Barry, you've lost it. You know, there's no shoe that's 18 to 36 inches long. And he says, no, he says, look very carefully.
Barry Riggy believes the marks were made by cleated sports shoes, dragged intentionally over the ground to cover their own tracks.
He says, the person's tipped their foot, brought the front sipes of the shoe to the ground, lifted the heel, and drawn it back, leaving these marks. And the minute that he said that, suddenly, at the end of the striations, in this mass of color and texture, which was the gravel, you could suddenly see the shoe impression. I think I made 3 or 4 plaster casts of different elements of the shoe once I had realized the significance of those striations. Obviously now we have at least something associated directly to the suspect, and that is his footwear.
By examining the plaster casts, police conclude the suspect was likely wearing size 6 baseball cleats. Although thousands of pairs of such shoes are sold within the province each year, police decide to write letters to dozens of amateur baseball teams that were in Edmonton for tournaments the same weekend of Punky's murder. They gather players' lists from the teams to cross-reference with other potential leads. At the same time, castings of the tire tracks at the scene and measurements of the turning radius on the ground reveal that the vehicle in the trucking yard was likely a front-wheel drive American car. If a van abducted Punky, perhaps a second vehicle was used to dump her body, one with its own unique set of tire prints. The new details about the car and its tires may one day connect a specific suspect to the scene, but like the baseball cleats, they do little to provide police with a specific name to investigate. The tips from the public now number over 1,000.
We had never seen an investigation like this in the history of Edmonton. The amount of information coming in was unprecedented. There was too many leads to follow, and there was nothing that pointed them in the direction of one man or another man, one suspect or another suspect.
We looked at parolees, we looked at people that had been released from mental hospitals, we looked at people even who had committed suicide. Some you were able to eliminate right away. You know, maybe they were in the hospital at the time, maybe they were in jail at the time, maybe they had an ironclad alibi, but there are so many that you were left wondering, you know, should or could you do more?
People were working, you know, on their days off and coming in on their days off and working over hours. Everybody wanted this one desperately badly.
Although police have no DNA evidence, they ask all potential suspects to provide blood, saliva, and hair samples. The move serves 2 purposes. A suspect unwilling to cooperate may warrant further examination. Secondly, with DNA technology advancing quickly, Punky's clothing or the hair discovered on her body may prove more revealing down the road. Meanwhile, public anger over the crime remains strong. Petitions circulate calling for a return of the death penalty for Punky's killer. A group of citizens sets up a self-declared justice squad to search for fresh clues. Still hoping for a breakthrough tip, Detective Alm keeps the unsolved murder in the public eye. Punky's picture is soon visible across the city.
We had the billboards, we had bus signs, we had posters, we had a locally produced documentary. Basically, the theme was someone out there knows.
Most people know Punky through the photograph of Punky. And what you see is a beautiful, little, vibrant little girl who's sitting there smiling out in her graduation cap, and that image became seared into the consciousness of Edmontonians.
I don't think there was anyone in Edmonton who was not aware of what had happened and was not actively with the police attempting to solve the crime.
The media campaign produces more tips to be chased down. At the same time, other investigations turn up a handful of new suspects. One of them is a 30-year-old man named Clifford Slay. With a long criminal history, he comes under fresh police scrutiny for the rape of a 13-year-old girl. Not only does he somewhat match the description of the suspect who grabbed Punky, a search warrant finds he owns the same kind of shoes connected to the crime.
Clifford Slay was interviewed at police headquarters for both the sexual assault on this 13-year-old girl as well as the Gustafson homicide, basically because of the baseball cleats that were found in the closet. And of course, the baseball cleats were believed to be a very key piece of evidence.
Although they still have no DNA profile to compare it with, Clifford Slay is asked to provide samples of his blood, saliva, and hair to police. He complies without hesitation.
So the police thought, well, that's a pretty good indication that maybe this guy didn't do it if he's willing to give us his DNA. For all he knows, this is going to link him to the crime right now.
At the same time, forensic experts come to the conclusion that Clifford Slay's cleats are different from the ones that marked up the crime scene. He also has an alibi.
Clifford Slay provided answers as to where he was. His family alibied him as to his whereabouts on the weekend in September when Corinne was abducted.
Around the same time, another criminal in custody for the murder of a convenience store clerk also catches police attention when they learn that the man wore special cleated shoes for his work as a roofer. Detectives Terry Alm and Al Savoie meet with him in prison.
We were sitting there in the interview room not knowing what kind of reception we were going to receive because we were told that he would not talk to us. He makes us, as cops, turns on his heel to walk away from us. And Al Savoie flipped a picture of Corinne in front of him. And he stopped dead in his tracks and said, hey, look, you know, I may have done some bad things, but I didn't do this. And so he pulled up a chair and he worked with us to establish that he was in no way responsible.
That same year, Ron Davies, the uncle of victim Punky Gustafson, also appears to be cleared of suspicion when he passes a polygraph test with flying colors.
And I can't remember a case where there were so many promising leads that evaporated so late into the investigation. I can't tell you how many times when it looked like, boy, we've got this solved, we're on the right track, just to watch the trail literally dry up in front of you.
As the grim one-year anniversary of Punky's murder approaches, police are no closer to finding her killer. Although they don't know it yet, they already possess the key evidence needed to solve the crime. New science will help them break the case wide open. September 1993. In Edmonton, Alberta, a year has passed since the unsolved murder of 6-year-old Corinne Gustafson, known to many simply as Punky. For the family of the victim, the fact that their daughter's killer remains at large compounds the bitter wounds of her death.
Even after we moved out of that area, I wasn't sleeping. I hear a little noise, I'm awake, thinking that whoever done it to her will come after me.
I just didn't give it care anymore. Oh, if I lived or died.
The American program Unsolved Mysteries profiles the case with hopes of stirring up fresh leads.
They came to Edmonton, filmed all over Edmonton. They interviewed police, Corinne's family. I had the opportunity to be at the telecenter on the night the story aired, and we received approximately 500 tips. as a result of the airing.
But like so many tips before, most lead to dead ends.
I knew that unless we had something more definitive, we were never going to get anywhere. At the end of the day, we needed something more.
Tips trickled in, but there were no solid leads. 1 year later, the Gustafsons still had no clue who killed their daughter.
Despite strong reminders in the local media, the case grows colder as the months pass. By the mid-1990s, more than 5,000 tips have been processed, creating enough paperwork to fill 2 entire rooms at police headquarters. Despite the passage of time, Punky's mother, Karen, stays in constant contact with investigators, hoping for any news that will help bring closure to the family.
Every day I phone. He's still working on anything new. Every day. We told you did it, nothing's new. We're still working on it. I was mad. To me, they weren't working hard enough.
Eventually, the investigative team started to decrease in size. It was basically just myself left working on the file with one other member.
But Terry, because of his sense of responsibility to Corrine, he never gave up. He had a picture of the little girl in his wallet. He had one on his desktop. Just stuck with it.
I felt like I had to do something more to bring it to a successful conclusion.
By the end of the decade, science provides a new option. DNA testing methods have been improving by leaps and bounds, and Detective Alm decides it may be time to re-examine the original crime scene evidence using fresh techniques. In the year 2000, almost 8 years after Punky's murder, he submits the young victim's clothing to one of North America's best DNA labs.
Over the next couple years, LabCorp starts to do various tests on the forensic evidence that was crime scene evidence from the Punky case. And they did a number of tests that hadn't been done in 1992. In March 2001, they strike gold.
On a section of Punky Gustafson's clothing, lab technicians find trace amounts of semen that hadn't been detected before. The discovery provides them with a unique DNA profile. An employee at the lab contacts Detective Alm in Edmonton.
He asked me, he says, well, did this girl Corrine have any boyfriends? And I said, well, she's only 6 years old. And he says, well, then I've got your killer. But when he told me that, I'll tell you, it was the best news I had had in the last 10 years.
Armed with a biological fingerprint of the killer, investigators in Edmonton prepare to test it against the close to 400 blood, saliva, and hair samples they gathered over the course of the previous decade. They begin with a top 10 list of the most prominent suspects they have investigated. The list includes the young man named Skunk and a mentally handicapped teenager from the same neighborhood. Even Ron Davies, Punky's uncle. Sample by sample, name by name, they are cleared of suspicion once and for all. But investigators hit a roadblock when they searched the name of convicted rapist Clifford Slay, the man who in 1993 fit the description of the suspect and owned shoes similar to those used in the crime.
Clifford Slay was one of them, because he was just somebody that, just in the back of my head, kind of bothered me.
Although Slay provided samples of his DNA, those samples are no longer on file, having been used as evidence in another trial. As one of their top 10 suspects, getting a fresh sample from Slay is a priority for Edmonton police. A national databank program solves the problem. Thanks to a new law, violent criminals and multiple sex offenders must submit DNA samples to be kept on file. When Clifford Slay's sample is secured for the database, police in Edmonton are immediately able to compare it with their profile. They have a match.
I was immediately completely elated. However, my mind already started going, okay, what about this? What about that? Because you're thinking, okay, you've identified him, but how do you now take it to court and convict him?
For police, the next step is to confront their suspect, secure a second DNA sample for their own evidence, and then push for a confession. The task falls to detectives Paul Link and Ralph Godfrey. On March 12, 2003, they enter Alberta's Bowden Penitentiary, where Clifford Slay is serving a 12-year sentence for other crimes.
My impression of Clifford Slay immediately upon meeting him was that he was a cold-hearted individual, very hard, hardened by the prison. He was a manipulator, I think a master manipulator, and a true psychopath.
After providing police with a fresh blood sample, Clifford Slay begins to speak, but not about the crime. Instead, he mentions his rough upbringing.
Talked about some of his past, problems he's had in his past. Wanted to just talk. I mean, he wanted to talk for a long time, but when we were willing to listen, and we did listen.
Clifford Slay went in this long, drawn-out story about how he had been a victim. One of the surest signs of a psychopath is that when they're confronted with their crime, they will try to elicit sympathy and pity.
I think he was setting us up or grooming us to tell us his story. I think we had a big impact on him because when we left that night, it would appear that he started to fall apart and he started to talk to people.
Clifford Slay discusses the crime with fellow inmates and guards.
And he started to concoct the story of what happened that day, to try to minimize his own culpability, his own guilt.
With the advancements of DNA and the fact that we had sperm on her panties, there was no way that he could say that he was not responsible for the kidnapping. There was no way he could say he was not responsible for the sexual assault. But what he could say is that he didn't intend to kill Corinne, and he could try and get out of first-degree murder.
Learning that Slay is talking, detectives Link and Godfrey return to the prison, eager to hear his version of how Punky died. If he convinces them, a dangerous convict may get off with as little as 10 years in prison for one of Alberta's most brutal crimes. March 12, 2003. The Bowden Penitentiary in Alberta, Canada. Detectives Paul Link and Ralph Godfrey enter a federal prison to secure a statement from the man that forensic science has tied to the rape and murder of 6-year-old Punky Gustafson.
He was very controlled, very smooth, and ultimately, I think, trying to draw the best hand that he could by planning what he said and how he acted.
Before long, Clifford Slay begins to tell his version of what happened the day Punky Gustafson went missing. September 1992. Slay explains he was in Edmonton that weekend with his common-law wife, Gail. During a night of heavy drinking, Gail tells relatives that Clifford had recently beat her up.
He has this fight with Gail in the morning where he says, "Why did you tell my family that, I had done this to you?" And Gail says, "Probably, well, you did it to me." And Clifford's very mad, and he wants to get some revenge.
What he set out to do was to punish Gail. And if he was going to punish Gail, the best way to do that was maybe to assault her daughter.
His plan that morning is to go find Gail's 12-year-old daughter, Clifford's stepdaughter, and to rape her. That's how Clifford is going to avenge himself on his common-law wife.
Slay then borrows a relative's vehicle without permission, a front-wheel drive American car.
He is out looking for this 12-year-old girl, and he can't find her.
Ultimately, he ended up in the parking lot of the condominium complex where Punky lived. And he saw Punky, and Lindsay.
Couldn't find the 12-year-old, decided he was going to take it out on 6-year-old Corinne.
I'd taken, this little girl to, I don't know, there was just this road that I found. When I realized that there was no traffic, it was very, it seemed very secluded, I just put it on myself and have sex with her. Got child knowledge and rape her. Which I ended up doing that.
I could feel, chill in my neck, and for an individual to sit there and then go through that and not show emotion, it's very chilling, very powerful.
According to Slay, Punky was still alive when he left her in the trucking yard where she was eventually found.
He was trying right at that stage the defense of manslaughter, knowing full well that there was no way that he could get anything less than that.
Despite the story, police leave the prison convinced they can proceed with first-degree murder charges. On March 14th, 2003, Clifford Slay is officially charged with Punky's murder.
That was a nightmare ever since. Going through it for 13 years, and then all of a sudden, it was just joy that they finally caught him.
Word spreads quickly through a city that has spent more than 10 years living in the shadow of the crime. The feeling is one of widespread relief.
There was a whack of media in the parking lot waiting for him to come in. They were going to give the media every access, every chance that they could to photograph this guy. Just to, let people know, hey, we got him. We've got him good. And he's not going anywhere. He was inside, camera right up to the glass. You don't care if we have the shot, you just want a shot. And you hope you've got your picture by the end of the day, which we did.
Despite so many false leads, such as the widespread one involving a blue van, one of the biggest investigations in the city's history has been solved.
I was very, very proud the Edmonton Police Service was able to clear this one off its books. And I think it spoke well to the tenacity of both the service and the investigators who worked on this file.
In May of 2005, Clifford Slay finally stands trial. From the start, he tries to duck the first-degree murder charge, pleading guilty to kidnapping and the lesser charge of manslaughter. The Crown promptly rejects his attempts to bargain.
They were just this really tight team, people who really got along, worked well together, and were absolutely committed to getting the right conviction, which in their mind was first-degree murder.
After a 2-week trial, they find Clifford Slay guilty of murder in the first degree. He is promptly sentenced to life in prison.
It just felt big relief come over me.
My head went down, and I looked at him. In my back of my mind, thinking to myself, good, he got the first degree.
The look on Karen Vallette's face, that was payoff enough in itself for me for, the last 13 years.
Punky's parents visit their daughter's resting place to share the news.
You never have to roll around the grave not knowing if justice has been served or not.
He got first degree, and I said, that's what you wanted. You could rest in peace and be our angel.
Every time I think of her, I always think of the good times that we went through, because I get to miss her so much. She always would be alive in my heart. he'll never get out, so he'll never affect another family the way he affected ours.
And they always segregate these guys, as you know. They keep them separate from mainstream. And I think probably the worst thing that you could probably be is a pedophile in jail. I think that's probably about as bad as it gets. It's the worst of the worst.
His evil is so unimaginable and unfathomable. He's the boogeyman. It's people like Clifford, men like that. That's why we have the tale of the boogeyman. He must remain in jail the rest of his life.